Hi guys, I'm Darren, and in this video we'll be checking out the new Caddx Walksnail Moonlight 4K kit. This kit has been out for a little while now, and there have been some early reviews on it, but I thought I'd wait a little bit, get some footage and show you guys what it's about. I've actually had this camera for a fair while. The first part of the video that you'll see next, the actual unboxing, I recorded at the end of December, and I've been sort of flying with it since then. I'm actually part of a testing team for Walksnail, so we go through products, firmwares, and test them before they're actually released. So hopefully this means that Walksnail products will improve, everything will get better, and everyone's happy. That's the main reason we're all doing it. But because of that, they sent me this 4K kit. This wasn't actually sent for review, but I've got it, so why not? So let's take a look and see what we think. Okay, so here we have the Caddx Walksnail Moonlight kit. This is a 4K onboard DVR with HD image going to the goggles. If you've had anything from Caddx before for your Walksnail system, the box will be very familiar. They're all pretty similar. It's got this nice cool gloss mixed with matte finish, which I think looks quite cool. It makes the item pop. So what we get is the Moonlight kit with an ND8 filter. We have 2 antennas. We have silicon cable for the UART. There's also actually a jumper cable as well. We'll go into that in a bit. And a quick start guide. So the other stuff we can get from this is that it comes with a 140mm MIPI cable, and the input power range is 7.4 volts to 2.25 volts, so that's 2S to a 6S. There's also a scratch code on here, so you can check that it's genuine. So I'm guessing if you scan this QR code, you actually get taken to the page where you can put the code in, and you can make sure that this is all genuine. Now, this was sent to me by Caddx, so I'm hoping that it's actually genuine. I'm sure that it is, but let's have a look inside. So again, this is pretty familiar. We get this little silk pull tab, and inside we have our product. On the top, we have the quick start guide. This side is English, the other side is Chinese, and there's a QR code at the bottom for the full manual. And basically we've got an exploded diagram. We'll actually take a look at this when we have the actual device in our hands, because it'll be a bit bigger, a bit easier to see. We've got the connection, so the power, ground, and then the UART. And then you can see here this little USB jumper cable to connect the 2 internal boards for when you do an update. There's the instructions here for linking up the device to your goggles, which is obviously the binding process. For the update process, you'll need to check the full manual. It is slightly different because we put the firmware on the SD card, but we also need to use this jumper cable here when we do the update. So check out the instructions for doing that. Alright, so before we delve into the really cool stuff, let's get the boring stuff out of the way. So we have our USB jumper cable here, which go between the 2 ports on the side of the actual VTX module. And we have our power, ground, and UART cable here. So we get everything we need to actually connect it to our flight controller. Now let's take out this module, because there's one more boring bit. That is some M2 machine screws. They're all hex head, so you can use that for fitting, I guess, the camera, or even this, because there is multiple attachment options with this unit. Right, so this is already out, so let's boring part, antennas. So these are 2 pretty standard Omnis. I can't actually find any specs on these with regards to VSWR or DBI. So yeah, 2 pretty standard antennas. Yeah, I'll get into that in a bit. But now we get to the cool stuff. So here we have our VTX unit, and this is a multi-board design. We have a board along the top, which is going to be the 4K stuff. It's got the SD card, and it's got this USB port here. And then we have another board on the bottom, which is going to be the VTX stuff to actually send it back to the goggles, which has this other USB port down here. Now, when you're doing an update, you need to link these two together because the SD card reader isn't directly accessed from the bottom board. I'm not overly keen on this. I think having a separate cable is something that's going to be easy to lose, and it's going to just cause problems. I mean, I was thinking that access could be a problem, especially if it's inside an aeroplane, but then the access issues will also affect the SD card, which we're going to want to get out to get our footage off, because downloading 4K footage over USB will be very slow. So yeah, access is not such an issue. The bigger issue is potentially losing the cable and it just genuinely being a bit of a pain. Let's have a look at the top. So we have here this plate, which is actually bolted down all the way through the VTX. And this is what's holding our MIPI cable in. My thoughts with this is, I don't know, it seems to me to be a bit too maybe flimsy. It would have been nice if there was some strain relief on it. I can just see this potentially being a problem, maybe snapping. Yeah, I'm not overly keen on this. Even if it's physically not an issue, visually it doesn't look great. It would maybe have been nice if there was a piece of rubber perhaps, just to hold that in, so that it looks like at least there's some protection there. These 4 screws here, they do go all the way through, and this is actually the 25.5mm mounting. So if you wanted to mount it like that, you would take those out, mount it, and then obviously you would need to sandwich this back together again, because these are holding the case together. The holes here are for a 20x20 mounting. Let's go to this side now. So we have here a standard connector. It's just a 4-pin connector with power, ground and the UART, so nice and easy to get in there. It looks quite recessed, so getting it out might not be so easy. Usually it's better if they're flush, because then you can sort of get in the side, but then there's quite an opening here, so if you needed to, maybe you could use a tool or something to get that connector out. We have 2 LEDs, one for the video recording, one for the binding, and then we have a binding button here, which you can't quite press manually. You will need some sort of tool. It's a good and bad thing. The good thing is it's actually protected. It's not going to get accidentally pressed. The bad thing is you need something to press it when you want to use it. But it's nowhere near as bad as like on the goggles where you've got this tiny hole. It's actually a decent sized hole and will be easy enough to press with something like a small Allen key. So this is all good. We've come to the last side, which is probably the thing I dislike the most, to be quite honest, and that is the antenna connections. To get the antennas on, you've got to take this plate off, then slot them in and try and push the antennas down onto these IPEX-1 connectors. That's not good for ease of access, but it's also not good because they're IPEX-1 connectors. On something this size, we don't need IPEX. In all honesty, the only Caddx stuff that I would even consider IPEX on would be the 1S and the light stuff. Anything bigger than that, then a better connection can be used and should be used. To me, this is an ideal candidate for MMCX. You could just have them on the back here, so you could just plug it straight in. Job done, and it's a better connection. The actual connectors themselves have less loss than IPEX-1. You can use bigger cables in MMCX than you can in IPEX-1, which again has less loss. And this is pretty important, especially for fixed wing. But as far as the rest of this case goes, it's very nice. It's all aluminium, looks like it's CNC milled. So this is actually going to be acting as a heat sink as well. We've got multiple attachment points, and to be fair, access seems fine for most of it. This is probably more made for quads because we have front camera access, rear antenna access, and then we have our sides open for the stuff like the connections, which on a quad frame is no problem whatsoever. But on a fixed wing, potentially we could have problems accessing the side. So that does make installation into a fixed wing a bit more of a thought process and a bit trickier potentially. But there's only so much space on here, so you know, it's got to be a compromise. We're just going to have to think about that when we do our builds. So let's move towards the camera. And the first thing I'm going to mention is this camera cable here, this MIPI cable. So this is a braided cable, which I first saw on the Pro camera, and actually I really like this. It may just be a visual thing, but I believe it does offer some protection. But yeah, it looks neater, and it just looks like it's a bit more robust. So it'd be really nice if the cables sort of the alternate lengths, like the 300mm cable, hopefully, or the 200 you could get with a braided cover over, because they do just look nicer. So onto the camera. This is an aluminium cased camera. There's 2 holes for the attachment on this, as opposed to one in the center. I'm sure quad frames these days can accommodate this as well as other types of installation. One thing I have noticed by its absence is the little triangle to show you which way is up. So I'm assuming that it's this way up so that the text is readable and the cable comes out the bottom. I don't think it really matters too much because you can always reverse it in the goggles. But yeah, usually there's a little arrow to show which is the top. It's a bit of a shame that's missing, just for confirmation. On the front we have our ND8 filter, and you can tell it's an ND8 filter because it says ND8 on the bottom, which leads me to believe that potentially there could be other filters following, maybe a 4 or a 16 for different light levels. Again, if you're flying this on a quad, changing that filter is not so much of an issue, or even if it's external on like a pan and tilt on a fixed wing. But if it's in foam, I don't think we're actually going to be using this at all. Having said that, it's a nice touch, because 4K, you think cinematic imagery, and having an ND filter on certain days will improve that. So yeah, it's a nice touch that one has been included. And yeah, there we go. It's rubberized on the inside, so when you actually put it onto the camera body, it's just a friction push fit, but that's on there pretty well. That's not going to come off in a crash. It takes a bit of effort to get it off. Once it is off, it's actually a very similar sized camera to the Pro camera. I believe it's actually slightly shorter. So here's my first thoughts. So the camera is quite nice. It's all aluminium. It's got a nice size lens on it. ND filter addition or inclusion is a nice touch, with potentially having others to follow. The only thing that I sort of miss is the little arrow. Again, if this is legible, is the right way up, and also you can reverse it in software, it doesn't really matter, but I think people have got used to it with Caddx, seeing the arrow and knowing which way is up. This cable, awesome. I hope they do different lengths with this braiding on there. As far as this unit goes, it seems very well built. A lot of it seems nicely thought out. The only concerns that I have are that it would be nice if there was some strain relief on this. And the final thing that I'm not keen on is the way you have to take this off and then put them down vertically somehow while trying to keep them straight. But most of all, I'm just not keen that it's IPEX at all. I'd much rather it have been MMCX. So this is how I set up my test aircraft. This is a Baby AR Wing Pro, and you can see I'm running it off of 3S1P lithium ion pack. This is an 18650 pack and 3000 milliamp hours. And the reason I was using this aircraft is because before putting this in, I had the V1 VTX with a nano camera in the front. I knew what to expect. I knew what it could do. I used the same antenna setup. So I had a fair comparison for things like penetration, heating, all that sort of stuff with this known airframe. Now, when I first flew this did get some overheating issues. And you'll notice that I actually cut away the air vent at the back on this side a bit more to let more air out, so there was more throughput. I didn't do anything on the hatch. That is stock. Oops. Yeah, so you can see it's all coming in through this vent. There's no extra air holes in the front. So it's all coming in here, which it sort of gets half of this, but it's drawing more out this side than this side because I left that hole the same size. There was an improvement on the heating when I did that. It actually was warmer and stayed cooler, so that was a big improvement. After actually installing it and flying it, there were a few things that I want to mention. The first of which is, as I suspected, these UFL connectors are really nasty. It takes ages to get them in, then you've got to screw it down, and they're still not the best solution or the strongest solution. If they'd been MMCX, could have put this in, click, click, job done. I actually had to replace this antenna after a crash because it pulled the cable out of the UFL connector, so I've had to do this at least twice, and it doesn't get any easier. As far as installation, you can tell this is quite a tight build. The bind button is on this side, but getting to it with a little stick or an old broken prop or something, it's actually pretty easy. There's no real issues with that. I don't need to get to that cable because it never comes out. Likewise, I've seen a lot of people complain about the link cable. Now, as far as fixed wing goes, it really doesn't matter. You can see mine is in there. Once I put it in, I've never taken it out. It's been no issue whatsoever. The place where this could be a problem is with multi-rotors, where you don't want it getting snagged and removed. So it's a 50-50. It's linking the VTX board with the 4K board. There is a reason for it being there, but maybe it could have been done a little better. For fixed wing applications, it's really not an issue. The SD card is right next to it. In this installation, it's a little bit of a pain because it's a very similar height to this flight controller. If I'd custom made the 3D printed base for it, there is actually a 3D printed base with an air gap underneath. I could have maybe raised it up a little bit more just to clear this flight controller, but I didn't, so it's a bit of a pain getting the SD card in and out. But again, it's nothing too taxing. It's nowhere near as bad as these connectors here. And I'm sure you'll agree, this is quite a small build for this system. This is a small wing. As far as fixed wing goes, this is quite a small install. One thing that I have noticed is if you're using 3S lithium ion, it doesn't like it when you get towards the end of the pack. I'm actually using this through the flight controller, so it's using the 9-volt BEC on the flight controller. So it does mean that when this pack gets below around 9.5 to 10 volts, it does start putting less power out to the VTX, which it can run at 8 volts, but once you're down to about 2.3, 2.2 volts per cell, this thing is actually saying it's around 6 or 7 volts. So it does struggle. You do get issues with that. The reason I'm running it through the flight controller and not directly connected to the battery is I want the video switching, so I can switch this off until I get satellites. There's no point having it on, just generating heat. So if you're using lithium ion, it's probably best to be 4S if your flight controller is knocking it down to 9 volts. From some of the contacts at Walksnail, the optimum voltage to run this at seems to be 12 volts. If you're below that, it will boost it to 12 volts. If you're above it, it will buck it down to 12 volts. So if you've got the option on your flight controller to output 12 volts to it, then that's the best one to use. I have put out some flight footage and shared it in groups. And one of the questions I got was, am I using the ND filter? And the answer is no. You can see here that it's just the regular lens. And the reason for that is I didn't want to cut any more foam away to get the camera in, because I will probably be putting this in a different aircraft and I didn't want to have the bigger hole which would need filling. I mean, potentially you could put the ND filter in here, but with such a small aircraft, it would probably stick out quite a bit and risk getting damaged. But I'm really happy with the image anyway without the ND filter, and we'll check out some footage now. So this is a video that I put together using some clips taken over a couple of days with the 4K system. I've done some stabilization using the gyroflow system, which I think works better than the electronic image stabilization. Gyroflow knows what's coming next, so it can balance stuff out better and stabilize better. It's just, you know, on board you don't know what's going to happen in the future, so you can't cope for it. But hopefully this video shows a few different scenarios and different light levels for the video. So this part here was probably about 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's just some chase footage with my friend's EDF. And you can see the sun's getting low. Again, this was probably a similar time, a different location, maybe a little bit later. And again, this was the same location. This is some low footage, so you can see here how the ground texture looks, and it's all looking great as far as I'm concerned. It's got plenty of detail in the shadowy areas. The bright areas don't get blown out too much, and actually for flying it's a really nice image. Of course, flying we see 1080p. This is the 4K 60 that's being shown here on the video. So again, we're flying towards the sun, so we have some areas that could be blown out, some areas that are shadowed, but overall you can see where you're going really well. Again, plenty of detail here. Look at the ripples on the water. There's plenty of detail in the image and it looks great. Thank you very much for watching, guys. See you on the next one. Fly your models like you stole them.